do crazy things when they're in love. They tend to let emotions control their actions rather than thinking with logic and reasoning. But if you were to list down the craziest thing anyone has done in the name of love, I'm sure murder would probably be part of that list. Well, the case we're uncovering today is heavy on the crazy part, although I'm not sure about the love part, because anyone in their right mind would never resort to murder to make the other person stick around. But 21-year-old Zuzu Verk was a junior at Solras State University, and she was an avid nature and wildlife lover. She had an appetite for adventure, and trying new things was part of her personality. So when Zuzu's parents tried their best to contact her and were met with silence, and when Zuzu failed to show up for an important exam, things seemed fishy. Where was Zuzu? Was she hurt? Was she in danger? She couldn't have possibly dropped off the radar unannounced, right? Well, the case of Zuzu Verk is layered with mystery and misery. And each event that unfolds, devastation and everyone's worst fear follows suit. Welcome to True Crime Stories. If you're new here, I'm your host, Ty Knotts. I post new true crime documentaries every single week. No AI narrations, no unnecessary drama, just a victim with a story to tell. So if you're into that kind of thing, hit that subscribe button. It's completely free and just keeps you up to date with all of my future videos. But Zuzu Renee Verk was born on April 21st, 1995, to parents Lori and Glenn Verk in Keller, Texas. She had a brother named Miles, and the family was one tight-knit unit built on love and trust. Miles described Zuzu as a blast to be around, and was the best sister he could have asked for. Now, I've never met Zuzu, but just looking through some of her photos, I can tell you without a doubt, this woman was probably a riot. She's never seen without an enormous grin, literally ever. The story behind Zuzu's name is also an interesting one. It was actually Glenn who wanted to name his daughter after Zuzu Bailey's character from the 1946 classic Christmas film, It's a Wonderful Life. Like anyone, Lori and Glenn both loved this movie, and they thought that if they ever had a daughter, they would name her Zuzu. Call it a late Christmas miracle or divine timing, but Lori found out she was pregnant in 1994, and 9 months later, sure enough, a healthy baby girl was born, and she was named Zuzu, obviously. Everyone who met Zuzu asked her about her unique name, so much so that she had a running joke with her dad about having an information card that she could just hand to people. But when it was time to go to college, after graduating from Timber Creek High School, Zuzu wanted to go to Solras University in Alpine, Texas. Alpine is a beautiful place with lots of spots for stargazing. It's a place that was as whimsical as Zuzu, and she loved the thought of living here. At university, Zuzu was studying conservation biology. She was a junior at the time, and she had just applied for a transfer to Texas A&M University for her senior year, given her great grades and being on the dean's list. But Zuzu didn't just choose conservation biology on a whim. She was really passionate about nature, conserving its beauty, wildlife, and other unique creations of nature. Zuzu was ambition personified. If she had a goal, she would make it her life's mission to reach it. This was really admirable about Zuzu because she never backed down even when things got hard. If she wanted to do something and it was worth the risk, then leave it to Zuzu to accomplish it with a determined smile on her face. Zuzu's magnetic personality caught the attention of a young man named Robert Fabian. Robert was 4 years older than Zuzu, and she was attracted to Robert's carefree and active social life. And he really had that zest in him that Zuzu found to be very charming. According to Zuzu's brother, Miles, Robert was also head over heels for Zuzu, and the two got along well. But Zuzu's mom, Lori, didn't share the same sentiment. Lori felt that Robert was very arrogant, loud, and selfish, and Lori didn't hold back her dislike for Robert. But she couldn't do anything because Zuzu was an adult, and she could make decisions for herself. For Lori, though, one thing was sure. She never liked Robert because she didn't like the way that he treated her daughter. Miles also couldn't help but think that Robert was very manipulative and that he didn't want Zuzu to ever leave the Alpine area. Now, for some context, Zuzu was awaiting her acceptance letter from Texas A&M, and after graduating she had plans to move to Japan since she loved traveling. But Robert clearly wasn't on the same page. He knew how much Zuzu wanted to go to Japan, but he just wasn't on board. He didn't want to go. But at the same time, he didn't want to break up with Zuzu either. Because of this obvious divide between the two, many described Zuzu and Robert's relationship as on and off again, because they just could never see eye to eye. Zuzu even confided in her mom and admitted that Robert wasn't someone she saw herself spending the rest of her life with, and this was something Zuzu knew from the beginning of the relationship. According to Lori, Zuzu said that her relationship with Robert was just a convenient one, and it wasn't going to last forever. But she could have never guessed that this one convenient relationship would be her last. Lori had last talked to Zuzu on October 10th, 2016, and they mainly caught up on things. And Zuzu also told her mom that she was about ready to finally tell Robert that she was moving to Texas A&M, and that would mark the end of their relationship. Lori also remembered Zuzu talking about Robert planning on taking her to a movie on October 11th, but Lori never thought that this would be the last time she would hear her daughter's voice. Several days went by, and Lori and Glenn tried to call and message Zuzu, but there was no response. Now, this wasn't normal for Zuzu at all. As busy as she was, calling her parents and keeping them updated with her day-to-day was the highlight of her day, so Zuzu not responding to calls or texts was very alarming. Lori at one point even texted Zuzu in sheer desperation, saying, "Please just tell us you're alive." Lori even reached out to Robert, who claimed he hadn't seen Zuzu at all that day, and that he was going to just give her space. Soon, Robert did call the detectives to perform a wellness check at Zuzu's residence. And finally, on October 14th, she was reported missing. Robert was also interviewed by the police because, according to Lori, he would have been the last person to have seen Zuzu. When asked about Zuzu and her whereabouts, Robert confessed that he had planned a romantic dinner date with Zuzu at his place on October 11th. When Zuzu got there, things were going smoothly until Robert mentioned his ex-girlfriend in passing, which caused Zuzu to become angry, and she left his apartment at 2 or 3 a.m. According to Robert, he tried calling Zuzu, but when she wasn't responding, he decided to just give her space. A massive search for Zuzu was conducted that included land and air searches. The search even stretched all the way to Mexico. Hundreds of volunteers on foot and on horseback canvassed 400 miles. Hours upon hours of CCTV footage were combed through by the police, but it was all to no avail. Missing posters were stuck up on walls, poles, and shops. Everywhere that the Verk family went, Zuzu's face was on the walls. There was even a $100,000 reward offered by various departments and donations for any information that led to Zuzu's return. But police soon announced they had unfortunately found a suspect. I say unfortunately because up to this point, people were hoping Zuzu would be found safe and sound. But after this revelation, well, things were not looking good. By now, investigators had gathered some information that pinned their suspicions straight onto Zuzu's on and off again boyfriend, Robert Fabian. But how did that happen? Well, Robert's downstairs neighbor, John Franco, had some interesting information about the night that Zuzu was at Robert's place for the dinner date. There were multiple leads coming in regarding Zuzu's case, and even though the detectives were going through each and every one statement in particular stood out to them the most. It was when the police visited Robert's house that they questioned the people around him, and his downstairs neighbor, John Franco, had some interesting things to say about him, and he revealed things that Robert had conveniently left out. According to John, he had seen Zuzu pulling up in the parking lot in her car and going inside of Robert's apartment. John also heard normal noises of conversation, laughing, and the clatter of dishes as if someone were making food. But one particular instance was engraved in John's memory. He remembered hearing someone say "shut up" rather loudly after dinner, but that was that. Later, John saw Robert leaving his apartment alone at 4 a.m., and Zuzu's car was still parked outside. John later recalled having heard arguing and weird noises coming from the upstairs, but he didn't think much of it. After hearing all of this, the investigators called Robert again for an interview, and this time his story changed. This time he said that after the argument about his ex-girlfriend, it was him who left the apartment for a drive to a nearby Dairy Queen to cool off. And after he came back, Zuzu was still there, but she left minutes later. This was immediately suspicious to the police, and the detectives straight up laid down the facts that they weren't buying Robert's story. Robert even gave consent to search his apartment, and this is where detectives found something really alarming. There was a mattress pad several pieces of clothing, and sheets that were discolored with bleach. Moreover, the bed was completely bare with no sheets and not even pillowcases, which was very odd for the investigators to see. To add to the suspicion, investigators noticed that Robert addressed Zuzu in the past tense. And after all these revelations, Robert was a prime suspect in Zuzu's disappearance. But the police were dreading that Zuzu's disappearance might have escalated to something darker. But Robert wasn't the only suspect in Zuzu's case. It seemed as though there was an accomplice involved, and it was none other than Robert's best friend, Chris Estrada. But how did Robert's best friend come into the picture? Well, an interview with Chris for Crime Watch Daily on December 6th of 2016 caught everyone's attention. Chris was acting all sorts of crazy. He was forcing a smile, and his expressions and body language were stiff and fidgety throughout the interview. Turns out, Chris and Robert had known each other since high school, and they were frequently contacting each other. When Robert's phone records were checked during the investigation, they found that he'd made a call to none other than Chris at 3:15 a.m. on October 12th. When the investigators questioned Chris, he stated that Robert had asked for his credit card the day before as he'd forgotten his at home. Robert then went to a dollar store to get plastic painter's drop cloths. Apparently, Robert wanted to use them to paint a table, and that was why he called Chris at 3 in the morning to paint a table. Either Robert had a pretty tight schedule and he only had the middle of the night to paint a table, or he had some amazing friends who would give up sleep to paint said table. Well, it's safe to say that the detectives didn't believe any of this story at all. In fact, a friend of Robert's named Brittany came forward with her own statement that said on October 13th at 12 a.m., Chris came over to her apartment and he looked very edgy and nervous, as if he'd seen a ghost. When Brittany asked about what had happened, Chris stated, "I don't want you to get involved." But also, what's up with Chris showing up everywhere at ungodly hours of the night? But all this aside, there was no solid evidence going anywhere, and Zuzu's case was slowly making its way towards a dead end. There was only circumstantial evidence, and even though Robert was a prime suspect, there just weren't any clues to lead the investigation. To add to the frustration, Chris wasn't of any help at all, as he stood by his weird helping his best friend paint a table at 3 a.m. story for the most part. The Verk family also held several press conferences in hopes of finding any clue about Zuzu. They even went as far as directly pleading with Robert to work with the investigators to find Zuzu, or at least figure out what had happened to her. And just like that, 3 whole months had passed by, and when it looked like there was no hope in solving Zuzu's case or ever finding her alive, a case-altering discovery was made. But it crushed any hopes of finding poor Zuzu alive. On February 3rd, 2017, 3 whole months after Zuzu had gone missing, a Border Patrol agent named Jared Maynard noticed something in a ditch in a remote area of Brewster County outside of Alpine. As he approached closer, he noticed that the disturbed dirt was actually a shallow grave, and there were also pieces of plastic poking out, along with a blue sock and black fabric. The investigators were notified immediately, and when the area was dug up, a body wrapped in a plastic painter's cloth was exhumed. When the remains were tested, they turned out to be those of 21-year-old Zuzu Verk. Zuzu had been killed, and her body was found months later in a ditch in the middle of nowhere, miles away from where she went missing. It was the news that hit the Verk family like a grenade, ruining everything and everyone in the wake of its explosion. Lori and Glenn's daughter, Miles' sister, who had plans to spread her wings and travel the world and had so much to experience, was now gone. While Zuzu's loved ones were in pieces, they also wanted to get justice for her, and luckily the police knew that they already had their man. See, the plastic painter's cloth actually matched the cloth that was purchased by Robert at the Dollar General store. The investigators knew that not only had Robert extinguished the light from Zuzu's eyes, but he'd also tried to get rid of her body and any evidence. And whether he admitted it or not, Robert's best friend Chris was involved. Luckily, within 24 hours of recovering Zuzu's body and lining all of the things up, Robert Fabian was arrested on charges of tampering with evidence and concealing a body. 2 days later, Chris Estrada was also arrested in Phoenix, Arizona on the same charges, although Robert's charges were soon upgraded to murder. Chris pleaded no contest in April of 2018, and he had to testify against his best friend Robert at trial, who had pleaded not guilty. Robert's attorney stressed that he was being wrongfully accused of murder. His fingerprints nor his DNA were found at the scene of the crime, so he couldn't have been the one to take Zuzu's life. According to Robert, the argument between him and Zuzu was only verbal, and things never got violent. A co-worker of Robert also took the stand and said that he was a normal guy, but after Zuzu's disappearance, she noticed a significant difference in his behavior. It was as if he was keeping tabs on Zuzu's investigation and was keen on knowing what the police had discovered so far in the investigation, which is just bizarre. On the third day of the trial, Chris took the stand and confessed that Robert had called him late in the night to talk about, quote, a matter of life or death. According to Chris, Robert had confided in him that the dinner between him and Zuzu had gone okay, but after a while, things had gotten physical. Robert was strangling Zuzu, and when she hyperventilated and stopped breathing, that was when Robert knew that he had ended her life. The attack took place in the bedroom, and Robert even tried to perform CPR on a now passed Zuzu. According to Chris, Robert was going into survival mode, and he, quote, didn't want to get caught. But it's a little late for that now. Robert was playing the whole thing off as if it were some kind of accident, but let me remind you, you can never strangle someone accidentally. It takes a lot of time, multiple minutes. It's not like something you can just do and be like, whoops. It doesn't work that way. According to Chris, Robert called him to help him get rid of Zuzu's body at least a dozen times, even visiting Chris's house in Alpine at one point, but Chris refused. Chris also went on to say that Robert begged him to not turn him in. Now, Chris's actions were very questionable because even though he might not have had a hand in Zuzu's passing, he failed to help the authorities. He withheld information that could have helped the investigation along and helped solve Zuzu's case quickly, making her loved ones go through countless bouts of pain, hopelessness, and uncertainty for 3 long months. In Chris's defense, though, he was in a tough spot. He saw how much Zuzu's family was suffering, but in order to help them heal, he would have to turn in his best friend. It was a terrible situation to be in, but that doesn't mean he shouldn't have done the right thing. At one point in the trial, a cellmate of Robert's, Roy Roman from Brewster County Jail, came forward and stated that he heard Robert confess that he had to kill Zuzu because she found out about a bisexual relationship between Robert and Chris, and apparently she threatened to expose him, leaving Robert with no choice but to take Zuzu out of the picture for good. According to Roy, Robert was also very remorseful and even broke down in his cell, saying, "I didn't mean to do this." Regardless, on May 8th of 2019, after 5 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Robert Fabian was found guilty of all charges. He was sentenced to life in prison with an additional 29 years for tampering with evidence. Chris Estrada, on the other hand, was sentenced to 42 months in prison, plus $317 court costs on the evidence tampering charge, and an additional year and another $317 on the evading charges. Following Robert's sentencing, Zuzu's family gave their own statements that were laced with a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness because they were never going to see Zuzu again, and relief that Robert, the person behind Zuzu's death, was finally facing the consequences of his senseless actions. But one thing that still gnaws at everyone's minds is why? Why did Robert take Zuzu's life? Was the only reason that he couldn't let Zuzu go? Was the reason for the events escalating to murder really Zuzu breaking things off with him? Or was this story about a supposed fling with Chris the real reason? These are the questions that leave everyone confused and terrified because only Zuzu and Robert know for sure what happened on the fateful night of October 11th and what the breaking point was. All Zuzu's family knows is that they miss her terribly. What's so heartbreaking was not long after Zuzu had gone missing, her parents received a letter in the mail from Texas A&M University, and it stated she'd been accepted. Zuzu's dream had come true, but she wasn't around to witness and experience this moment. It's just so tragic for Zuzu's parents to know that she'll never graduate college or start her life after the fact. This woman had so much to offer, and all of her opportunities were completely robbed by this man. After all was said and done, Sul Ross State University, Zuzu's college of choice, paid homage to Zuzu by naming their amphitheater after her, now called Zuzu's Place. Sul State also named a natural resource management scholarship after Zuzu as well. One relationship ruined everything, and it took away Zuzu's dreams, her ambitions, and her life. And it is a bitter pill that the Verk family has a hard time swallowing. Miles misses his sister a lot. As much as she often irritated him, as any brother and sister do, Miles is doing his best to hold on to the parts of Zuzu that make it somewhat easier for him to go on with his life. Miles remembers his sister and their house that they shared when they moved to Alpine. Before Zuzu went missing, Miles saw her by the sink, doing dishes before bidding him goodnight. These memories of Zuzu that bring him peace and solace also have immense sadness at the same time. The community of Alpine was very supportive of the Verk family. The family expressed gratitude to the people that helped them through this very unfortunate time. The Verk family believes that if it wasn't for the support from the community that Zuzu was such a huge part of, they would have lost their way in the pitch-black darkness of grief. Zuzu was a dreamer, and she wasn't about to let anyone stop her. But one person decided that if he couldn't have her, if he wasn't the center of her world, then he wouldn't hesitate to crash, burn, and destroy her forever. If you hold on to something too tightly, then it's bound to eventually break apart. And the loss of that very thing can make you spiral out of control. That's exactly what Robert did to Zuzu. He tried to keep her with him, but when Zuzu resisted, he knew that he had to do something about it, which is just so chilling. It's important to remember, don't waste your time with people that try to hold you back. Zuzu had such big dreams of adventure and making a difference in the world, but Robert, on the other hand, just wanted her to sit down, stay put, and bend to his every will. Don't let yourself be held down by people like this. Zuzu was so close to breaking free from the clutches of this monster, but she just didn't quite make it out in time. Don't let the same happen to you. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of True Crime Stories. I wanted to give a special thank you to a couple channel members, including Sandra Carroll and Kevin Parman. If you also want to become a member of the channel, you'll gain access to new videos sometimes days or weeks before they're uploaded to the public, and it's currently the best way you can support the channel and help out. I really appreciate all of you that have decided to do that. So if you want to join, you can click that big join button below the video, or if that's not there, you can find the link down in the description. But as always, if you enjoyed this video, check out this other interesting case I covered, and don't forget to subscribe. It's totally free and keeps you up to date with all of my future videos. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.